how do you count transactions per second? So Sui was proposing for a while you count database interactions, which are
Mhm.
basically reads or write operations that take place. On that metric, Solana's already pushing hundreds of thousands of transactions per second in terms of database interactions, if not millions of transactions per second, because of the way that network is
Right.
constructed. There are also ways of basically saying, what can you do with a transaction? Because not all transactions are created equal.
Hello, and welcome to Proof of Talk, the cryptocurrency podcast where we invite leaders and builders into the space to come on and talk about their experience in the industry as well as the projects and products that they've been building. My name is Andre, and I've been in the cryptocurrency space since 2017. I've also helped co found algorithmic crypto trading platform Aesir that enables users to quickly and easily automate their trades while managing the risk. I'm here today with Austin Federa, who's the head of strategy at the Solana Foundation. Great to have you here, man. How's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on today.
No, my pleasure. Let me just say that we've had some incredibly bullish last couple of weeks, and the market's been going nuts, and it's amazing to see it that way. And it all just kind of happened without the hype of the mainstream media that was there in the last bull run. So to kind of see this where we are right now, and everyone's like quiet about everything, is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, this is kind of one of those, everyone loves the bear market from a builder perspective because, there's less noise, there's more signal, the ratio is good. But, I think this sort of time when sort of the retail craze has not hit, the sort of, the big brands are still sitting stuff out for the most part. Like, this is honestly, I think, one of the best times to be a builder and to be involved in the blockchain ecosystem.
100%, yes, and you are completely right about the bear market, kind of helping flush out all the hype and kind of get people focused on building. I think that's super important for a
Yeah.
bull bear cycle for the entire crypto industry as a whole. By the way, how did you get into crypto? What was like your first moment that kind of clicked in your head?
Well, I mean, I bought some Bitcoin back in the day and completely got rugged by Mt. Gox, as I think a lot of us had their original
Yeah,
experience being. And that honestly washed me out of the industry for a little bit. And then it
yeah,
wasn't until late 2017, I was working for a fintech company, and they were trying to, basically create some more revenue. It was a startup that was kind of failing at that point, and they were
yeah,
trying to build a borrow lend token on Ethereum. Back before we would have branded this as DeFi, this was just, oh, maybe we can do this via smart contracts. Project never went to, fruition.
right.
Company sort of pretty much wound down a few months later. But I'd sort of been bit by the bug because I was never particularly taken with the Bunker Boys vision of Bitcoin that, like, the only thing that's going to be valuable in a Mad Max world is Bitcoin. And it's like, that could be true. That could be not true.
Yeah,
You
probably
still,
not, but yeah,
yeah, but sort of setting that aside, like, that is not a world I personally care about planning for. Like, if that's the world we end up in, like, so much has gone wrong that, the last thing on my mind is Bitcoin. But
right.
the Ethereum vision of smart contracts, for a while was just not that compelling because these were purely theoretical. No one had sort of built anything on them yet. But then, in 2017, like, having to sit down and start working out, like, okay, what would the architecture of something like this look like? For me, it clicked, and I finally saw what a lot of people had seen way before me, which was the power of these smart contracts and, what the world 5, 10 years in the future could look like. And so, I went to work for Republic, running Republic and launching Republic Crypto with them, which was an awesome experience. We did, this was right during like the run up and then crash of the 2018, Bitcoin bubble. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it was quite a time, but I got bit by the bug and I've been working in this space ever since.
No, that's fantastic. And actually, your story is very similar to the way I got into crypto as well, because I first heard about Bitcoin in 2013, and I was looking for ways to mine Bitcoin. And it was just at the time where these new ASIC miners, like the Bitmain
Yeah.
Ant miners, like the S9, the original S9 was created onto the market, and it was super expensive at the time. So I was trying to figure out like what's the profitability? Do I need to move to Iceland for cheap electricity? Now, I was trying to calculate all these things, and eventually I didn't buy an S9. I
Yeah.
just ended up mining some on my GPU and buying some. And I didn't get drugged by Mount Gox, but I lost that wallet and I
Yeah.
never recovered it. And
Yeah.
then that also pushed me out of crypto up until 2017, up until Ethereum started, kicking a little bit and kind of exactly like you said, understanding the power of smart contracts and what they are and what they can do. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's funny, like Tolly's got this great story about buying a Bitcoin miner, and they kept delaying shipping for 9 months, and they were just mining on these things before they shipped them out to people
No
because it was so
way.
profitable. And it's like this was the early days of the industry, as it reminds you of like the Wild West of like trust companies in like like literally the Wild West in the United States in like the 1890s and stuff of just like all this
Yeah.
crazy stuff going on with like corporations. And yeah, it's been really interesting to see how quickly the industry has matured since those days.
Yeah, a good portion of it. I feel like there's still some sections that are kind of Wild West in DeFi. Like DeFi is still not at the level where you could just take someone who's completely outside of crypto and put them in DeFi and be like, okay, now I figure it out. Because there's still a lot of unknowns there.
Yeah, to be fair though, I don't think the stock market is in that place either though,
Oh
right?
yeah,
As Robin Hood showed, is if you just open the floodgates to a bunch of people, some of them will make great decisions and make generational wealth and trades, and others will lose their life savings. So,
yeah.
I think there's always a question when we talk about like the risks in DeFi of like, what are we really grading DeFi against,
Mm,
right? Because like, yeah, you can put your money in a bank account and
yeah,
there's no risk and there's also no reward. In fact, there's negative interest rates, right, in all of your bank
yeah.
deposits. And you can do stuff in the stock market, but also if you don't know what you're doing there, it is quite possible to make bad decisions and lose a bunch of money. And so I think a lot of the times there's a sense that DeFi is more dangerous than it actually is,
Mm.
right? And I sort of like, the analogy is very much, I would say, like when it comes to anything else that involves money, is like, yeah, you can totally buy a house in a bad area for too much money, and you can lose money on that idea, right? And it can be a bad
Oh yeah.
financial decision. There's that doesn't mean we have to change the way that people necessarily buy and sell houses to make it harder for people to do something like that. This is just a process of anything that involves money is you have to understand what you're doing before you do it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I agree that it's in fact human nature that needs to adapt to some new technologies. It's not the technologies themselves. I feel greed has always been part of us as humans, and if there's something that allows you to express that greed in a way, then you will probably make a silly decision if you can't manage your own emotions.
Yeah, this is the genius of, regulated capitalism, right? Is like if you take natural human greed and you don't put any constraints on it and you just put it towards the destructive side of greed is corruption, right?
Right.
Like that is sort of the classic poles here. On one end of the spectrum you have unregulated greed, which is just corruption and warlords and fiefdom and all the things you see in failed states. And then on the other end of the spectrum you have regulated capitalism, which
Yeah.
has been the greatest driver of wealth, innovation, and lifting billions of people out of poverty that we have ever seen. Right, the global poverty rate has just catered in the last 20, 30 years, largely due to global capitalism. And yes, there's lots of bad externalities that have come with that, but on the whole, like harnessing the power of human greed to produce systemic advancement for the majority of people all around the world is an incredibly powerful force.
Yeah, and I feel like gambling is actually, it's sometimes perceived that it's more okay to gamble in an actual casino than it
It's
is to
ridiculous.
get into,
Don't even get me started
it's
on this. Like the US, right? Gambling is larger than all other entertainment spending combined. People spend more money on gambling than sports tickets, than concert tickets, than music, than
It's
movies, any
crazy.
of that stuff combined. And that is that is an industry where you're mathematically guaranteed to lose money on every opportunity that's
Yeah,
possible. And
it's
that's
proven
considered
that
fine.
you will lose money. Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
literally programmed in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I keep saying this on my podcast, and I'm terribly sorry if I'm boring anyone, but I'm not sure if you knew. And this is just an example of how sometimes regulation it just goes completely off the charts, right? I'm based in the UK, so I'm subject to UK regulations when it comes
sure.
to cryptocurrency. Um, well, recently, I would say recently was a few months ago. Binance's knowledge base is no longer accessible in the UK unless you use a VPN, right?
Hmm.
So the one thing that lets you learn about investments that you're potentially going to be making, the government says, no, no, no. How about you just go blind? We don't
Yeah.
want knowledge here. We don't want information because that's dangerous, and you might actually buy something that you know what it does. It's just
Yeah,
wild.
and it's tricky because, like, I will say at my heart, I actually believe that regulation is a very important part of a healthy and vibrant ecosystem, and that there's
Yeah,
very much a role for, a lot of people in the space will be like, oh, all the government lawyers. It's like, no, government lawyers are doing God's work. Like, a lot of the time, what they're doing is actually really important work. But
yeah,
you look at something like the accredited investor laws in the United States that say pretty much the only richest 10% of the population can invest in private companies, which includes things like private token sales. And that has been a real barrier to wealth creation for a huge number of people. Not sort of the bottom poorest section, which have more basic living requirements that they need, but people who are solidly middle class and they have an extra $5,000 they could invest in something. They're barred from investing in a lot of these types of asset classes, and that is done out of a sense of consumer protection that I think is probably misplaced. But
mm,
these people are trying to do good things, and sometimes you just get too far removed from the impact of the work and things can go off the rails. But the great thing about democracies is we have methods for self-correction that lots of other types of government systems don't have.
yeah, and that's very well put. I think in time, if something goes too extreme in one direction, it inevitably goes back to a nice balanced state. And you can see that if you're actually looking at financial markets, if you're looking at politics, if you're looking at everything tends to follow an average. And whenever something goes too far away from an average, it eventually corrects. And
Yeah.
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 But anyway, I can just keep going about this. There's so many things about regulation that I think could be improved and should be improved, but I'm sure that in time, we'll just see common sense. Um, I didn't get when you eventually start. When did you first start working for the Solana Foundation?
So I joined the Solana ecosystem in January of 2021. Before that, I
Nice.
was working for Bison Trails. I was working on product marketing and platform and product for them. They got acquired by Coinbase, which was awesome for the
Yeah.
founders and the folks over there. I thought going to something like an L1, getting closer to the actual blockchain itself as opposed to at the infrastructure layer, was a really great next move for me. And some folks I'd worked with at Republic previously actually had gone and joined Solana Labs, and so they got me connected in here. And it was one of those classic things where I, I was one of those people that thought I was missing something about the sharding roadmap and the layer two roadmap in
Right.
Ethereum. And I had questions for myself around, like, well, how does liquidity work? How does composability work? And then it's like, oh, we'll figure it out with bridges and things like that. And to me, that felt counterintuitive. It felt like probably an approach that seemed more predictable and was more likely to sort of return from a UX standpoint was building things in one global state machine, which is the way that the Ethereum L1 sort of had always been built before
Right.
this sort of sharding and then eventually layered model came into place. And so, getting on a call and talking with Anatoly and Raj, like two of the co-founders, about what that long-term vision was for Solana scaling, which was one global state machine with parallelization built in and at the base level, synchronizing as close to the speed of light and trying to push for as high transaction throughput as possible, the lowest cost possible for transactions with really fast finality. That vision really spoke to me. And I have been one of those people that all of my career I have to believe in what I'm doing, or else I'm not a particularly motivated employee, and this was one of those, quite frankly, and this is one of the things I was like, oh yeah, this vision I completely get. That this to me makes computer science sense. It makes social science sense. And even if the vision of Solana ends up being too big and it doesn't end up working out, because you got to remember this was Solana network had been live for about 9 months at this point and had very few users. It's like
Yeah.
regardless, I will learn a ton from this experience, and never looked back since then.
Man, that's an awesome story. And I feel like that's exactly what creates great projects. It's seeing that you resonate with the core mission ideas, the big vision, like the blue sky thinking. And then that just motivates you in a way that no other job can motivate you. And Solana did grow a lot in a very short amount of time. I think it resonated with a lot of people. I think a lot of people realize the power that such a high transaction throughput has. um and it's been when did the base chain go live? Did
March of 2020.
March of 2020, so
Yeah.
4 years old. Happy
Yeah,
birthday.
and right as the world was going into lockdown as well too. This is sort of one of I was not around for this part of it, but this is one of sort of the unsung success stories of the Solana network was, at that time, this is what Solana Labs had done, I think a 50% layoff of
Right.
employees, running up to the launch of mainnet. Like the idea was like the network didn't even launch with smart contract support. This was a real like do or die moment because you got to remember that they were fundraising in the bear following, the collapse of 2018.
Yeah.
And so it would, I think they had 75 meetings with VCs before someone finally agreed to write a check. There's sort of all these memes about, oh, like networks that raised a ton of money beforehand and like had all like Solana was not one of those networks by any means.
Yeah.
This was a network where it was scrapping pennies out of the couch to try and get by and get to mainnet launch. And so launching in March of 2020, right as the world's going into lockdown, as the markets are in free fall, that is a really hard time to try and launch a new network.
Ooh.
But
Yeah.
this was some of the power of the network too, is that this incredibly fast, very interesting, brand new architecture launched right as a lot of people were stuck at home with not much to do. And so a lot of developers from Web 2 who had been curious about blockchain, one way or another, they found their way to the Solana ecosystem, and they started experimenting and building really cool stuff on the network.
Yeah, and I think that's an integral part, just getting developers to be interested in your product and to build on it. I would consider myself one of these developers because I was doing a lot of coding during even coding as a hobby during the COVID times,
Yeah.
and that's when I discovered I always wanted to understand the technical aspects of how NFTs work, how smart contracts work,
Hmm.
how do you go about creating one, how do you go about buying one, what is the marketplace, where how does the data flow through all of these systems. And I was initially looking at Ethereum and Solidity, and I was like, well, I could do it on the test net and it wouldn't really cost me much.
Right.
But then if I really want to do it on the main net, then I don't feel like spending $50 for a transaction. So I was like, okay, let me have a look at Solana. And there were already a couple of solutions built at the time that would allow you to create NFT marketplaces. There was Metaplex
Yep.
that you would create your own NFT marketplace, and you could also roll out your own custom solution if you wanted. So I just got into that, and I just got stuck into it for a little while until I created a collection just for the pure, like science behind it to see
Yeah.
how it works.
Yeah, and you bring up Metaplex, which is a really great example of how Solana is built on just a very different architecture than other networks. So, in most networks, when you want to deploy an NFT, you have to deploy two different things. You have to deploy the data that will become your NFT, your photo, your traits, your rarity scores, all that stuff. But you also actually have to deploy the minting contract. And this is part of why minting NFT, as you know, this is part of why minting NFTs on EVM chains is so expensive because you're not just deploying the NFT, you're deploying a contract to govern the NFT. Solana, and this really comes from a lot of the founders coming from Qualcomm and embedded systems where you had very, very little compute. Not like embedded systems like an iPhone, like
Yeah.
flip phones, right? The Motorola Razr, like these really constrained compute environments where you had to squeeze every ounce of performance out of every, iteration of a cycle you could possibly get. And so this concept of program reusability is really core to the Solana thesis. And program reusability means that there's an on-chain program that you can feed data to that'll output something. And,
Right.
that is sort of your classic programming model, but that something you feed into it can be data to mint an NFT. It could be a swap transaction you want to run, all these sorts of things. And so what this means is that when you're deploying programs very few people actually deploy programs on Solana unless they're building a net new program.
Yeah.
Everyone else is just deploying data via one of these contracts, whether that contract is a minting contract like the token metadata contract that Metaplex has built, or the compression contract for compressed NFTs or something along those lines. That program reusability has been really key to Solana's scalability and success, and quite
Hmm.
frankly, composability as well, because it produces a lot more interoperable programs and protocols.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it's great to see that the performance aspect of Solana is consistent throughout the entire ecosystem, which also goes to speak to the smart contracts and the language behind the smart contracts, right? Which is Rust, which is known to be a very efficient memory safe language to use.
Yeah, and one of the cool things here, there's a lot of talk today about modular architectures versus
Yeah.
integrated architectures, or monolithic, if you want to kind of use any of these marketing terms, right? One of the great things about Solana is under the hood, everything actually runs on Berkeley Packet Filter. And so what that means is that you can write programs in a ton of different languages and frameworks, and they'll all compile down to this one common layer. And so, people often say, "Oh, Solana programs are written in Rust." That is true that a lot of people write programs in Rust, but you can also write programs in C. There's a program now to write programs in Move, right? You can use Anchor, which is this like programming abstraction framework on top of Solana for this. There's Python compilers now too, where you can write stuff in Python. And you could even add support for pretty much any language you want by writing this front end to LLVM. And so the advantage of this here is you kind of get a certain amount of modularity within the Solana system, but it's not multiple VMs. It all runs in the same virtual machine. So when you're writing code in Move, it's not like you're using the Move VM. You're just using the Move language to be able to write code that'll run natively on the Solana virtual machine.
Right.
And on top of that, you can even see things like Neon EVM, which is an EVM emulation layer on top of Solana. That is not an L2. That is simply a smart contract that emulates the Ethereum virtual machine. So what that means is you can actually have Ethereum virtual machine native programs on Solana that are able to atomically compose with Solana native programs because again, they're all running in the same state in the same virtual machine.
Wait,
And
that's
so
crazy.
that
Let me unpack that.
yeah,
Okay, so you would be able to write EVM compatible programs on Solana and run them on Solana, essentially.
yes.
Interact with
And
them from EVM chains or from
you
Solana.
so for example, if you take Aave or something like that and you deploy it on Neon on Solana, you can actually run a transaction that hits up, a let borrow lend pool on Solana and then goes and does something on Aave and then actually comes back and does something else on the Solana virtual machine as well. And because that all exists in the same global state, that can all be composable because all it is from the network standpoint is different programs are interacting with with the same piece of state. But it doesn't
Right.
matter is like, oh, is that piece of state now talking to the Orca program? Is it now talking to the Jupiter program? Is it now talking to Aave via talking to Neon? So there's a lot of composability there that gets unlocked by these things being all in one global state. I think a lot of times people think of something like the Neon EVM as an L2 on Solana. And it's
Right.
not an L2, it's running in the same state that Solana is running in. Whereas in an L2, you have the base layer and then you have a second layer on top of it and programs run on top of that second layer. But if you want to move from the layer 2 to the layer 1, that is a bridging operation or at least a proof operation because
Yeah.
they're two separate pieces of state. That is not the case with Solana, and that is part of what the long-term vision is that Solana becomes and continues to be one global state for, the execution environment of blockchain.
Right. So that goes to say that there will never really be a need to have an L2 on Solana. Is that accurate to say?
I think it really depends, right? And the reason I say it depends is because if we get to a world where 6 billion people, in the world concurrently transacting on blockchain, um, You don't necessarily need layers there, but you may need things like multiple concurrent block producers, which is something that the team's sort of already working on. The ability to build two blocks at the same time and then
Right.
execute those blocks either in parallel or in a process where you basically bring things together and work from there. So there also may be need for layers on Solana at some point for very specific types of applications. Now, these are not layers necessarily for scale. These are layers to say like, oh, I want to build an AI system on Solana, and so we need really beefy validators to be able to run on-chain AI models. So maybe
Right.
that quote unquote L2 is just a subset of validators that have all spent $20,000 on a super powerful GPU so they can run these types of models. But at that point, we're really talking more about a committee or a subset model than a proper layer. And even if layers are needed at some point, you always want to minimize the number of layers because each layer is a point of centralization. Each layer is a middleman that'll extract tax. Each layer is a point of failure. And so even if we get to a world where, it's like, okay, maybe there is a need for a layer or two on Solana, it's going to be one or two layers. It's not going to be 47 layers. And each layer is going to have 10,000 times the throughput of the base chain, right? Because right now, if you go from, a layer one on Ethereum, which does about 14 to 20 things per second, to a layer two, those layer twos are doing 70 to 90 things per second. That is, still a fraction of what the Solana mainnet can process today. So if you have a
Yeah.
mainnet on Solana that's producing a million transactions per second, which is the benchmark that FireDancer is shooting for, they're not going to hit that at launch, but over the next few years to get the network up to a place where it can handle a million transactions per second, that means a layer 2 is gonna be at least 10 million transactions per second, right? And that is the sort of entire thesis here is as few layers as possible, which is ideally 1.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Is Solana still on about 65,000 transactions per second right now?
So transactions per second, I think, this is a nerdy enough podcast we can get into this. This is a
Oh, yeah,
very
100%.
contentious thing when you push into, like, the technical space of blockchain, which is how do you count transactions per second? So Sui was proposing for a while you count database interactions, which are
Mhm.
basically reads or write operations that take place. On that metric, Solana is already pushing hundreds of thousands of transactions per second in terms of database interactions, if not millions of transactions per second, because of the way that network is
Right.
constructed. There are also ways of basically saying, what can you do with a transaction? Because not all transactions are created equal, right? A transaction where I send you one soul is a much computationally simpler transaction than a transaction where you mint an NFT using
Right.
money you've borrowed from a marketplace, right? Those can all be one transaction, right? One signature and one fee payer to do a certain set of things, but the fees are different on them and the amount you can get done in that transaction is different. So, on simple transfers on those sort of one soul back and forth, yes, that's where that 65,000 number comes. Steady state, you see the Solana network at about 4 to 5,000 transactions per second,
Right.
bursting up to about 12,000 transactions per second, right? And so,
Right.
but this really depends on what work you're trying to get done on the network as well. And this is true for all blockchains. This is not a Solana specific thing. I think you saw, for example, when inscriptions became all the hype, a few months ago, there were networks that crawled down to single transactions per second because inscriptions just were a different type of transaction with a different type of data problem that these networks weren't built for, right? You actually saw it halt several networks
Yeah.
because of the difficulty of handling inscription data, and that sort of is proof that like the TPS is sort of like how much horsepower does your car have,
Right.
like that doesn't actually tell you how fast the car goes, right? There's all these metrics used like brake horsepower and traction and aerodynamic profile. And, but it is one metric that I think a lot of people hang their hat on to say, or GDP is another one, right? GDP does not tell you anything about how rich the people in a country are.
Yeah.
It just tells you how much economic activity there is in that country. That could be 5 Jeff Bezoses and a bunch of, people who are just getting paid $5 an hour, or that could be a perfectly egalitarian, beautiful society. You can't tell just by looking at GDP.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it goes the same for market cap. You can't judge
Right.
a project's adoption by market cap. There's a lot of things that go into market cap. Even if you just consider the let's pretend there's no like wash trading or anything, under the board. If everything's completely above board, there's still a lot of things to consider within that. So is there like a unique metric that accurately represents TPS? Maybe something like compute per second, like an actual, hey, it
Yeah.
consumes this amount of tera, hertz per second or something.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so this is tricky because then Bitcoin would be the highest performing
It's
network
true.
out there, right? And like we all know, Bitcoin's great, but it can do basically nothing, right? And yes, there's L2s and Bitcoin coming. Set that aside for a second. All Bitcoin can do is send Bitcoin, right? So are we really going to say that Bitcoin is the most performant blockchain out there? Like that obviously doesn't feel accurate. And this is the place you always get to whenever you do these metrics, right? I think this is, transactions per second ends up being a little bit like pornography. It's very hard to define, but you know what it is when you see it. And from this perspective, what that means is like, can I go on a network and pay a reasonable amount of fee, which is ideally very small, and do the things I want to do without being constrained by the usability of the network? I think that's how a user defines is a network scalable,
Right.
right? Like I think like a great example of this is like Cloudflare,
Mm,
right? Cloudflare is like the CDN layer for the Web 2 internet. And from a user perspective, YouTube is scalable, right? YouTube, I never have buffering problems on YouTube, or if I do, it's on my internet connection, right? But on the back end, there's all this crazy stuff going on to make that happen. But or Cloudflare, right? It's like when there's a massive big streaming event like the Super Bowl, or everyone's trying to download like a new thing that came out. Does it actually matter to a user how those are not actually write operations? That's just read data operations. All the user cares about is, am I able to do the thing I wanted to do? From a developer
yeah.
perspective, it's very similar, right? It's like, do I really care, where Amazon has its data centers? Do I just care that I can build the type of applications I want to build on AWS for a reasonable cost? And if they're doing their job correctly, I don't really need to think about, oh well, is this data center in Cincinnati or Tokyo, right? And so I think that's sort of the problem with all these TPS metrics is we try and boil it down to one number that's going to tell people, is this network good for users and good for developers? And the only way to figure out if a network is good for users and good for developers is to actually go talk to users and developers. And I think what you'll see is like most developers are very happy with Solana and they say they can't build what they want to build anywhere else. Most users say that Solana has an incredible user experience. It's fast, it's cheap, it's snappy, it feels and this is like one of those weird compliments, but it feels just like using Web 2. What we mean by
Mm.
that is there's none of that sort of Web 3 baggage and Web 3 overhead of like, okay, well, I sent a transaction and it cost me $30 and now I have to wait 5 minutes to see if it actually worked. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, and that is sort of one of the big visions there of like how can this technology compete with centralized technology? It has to offer a user experience that is at least on par with what a centralized solution is able to provide.
That's that's a great way of putting it. I haven't heard it phrased in quite that way before, and I feel like comparing Web 3 to the consistency and the familiarity of Web 2, it's super important because I think it's all starting to get more easier for people to
Right.
adopt new technologies and interact with new technologies. So you want to be at a point where you expect things to just be familiar and work without
Yes.
thinking, oh, is am I gonna get this transaction, I'm gonna send it again, I'm gonna just bump up the nonce. Like, yeah, we've all been there. And
Yeah, and look, to be fair, there are still a lot of optimizations
mm,
to be done on Solana to make it the first class user experience it needs to be, right? There are still too many times when a user has to bump a priority fee because there's some bugs right now in how the scheduler schedules transactions that, are getting fixed. But like this is not to say Solana is a finished product in this regard at all. It is simply to say these are the goals that we all have to set. And I think Solana's the closest of any network, but we're not there today yet.
yeah, no, 100%. And by the way, congratulations on announcing chapter 2. 100,000 pre-orders, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so the Chapter 2 project is the next generation of the Solana Saga, which was the Solana mobile phone. This is not done by the foundation. This is actually done out of Solana Labs. They're a totally different company. I don't know what the Chapter 2 looks like. I had to
Right.
pre-order my own. I haven't seen it. They won't tell me. So these really are like very independent operations, but it's really awesome to see them taking that forward into the next iteration of the product.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it just builds up that confidence, and I'm pumped to see it. I can't wait to get mine. Just
Me
2025.
too.
Just a little while left to wait on that. You know,
Yeah, I think they're trying to ship in like Q1 of 2025 is sort of the goal there.
oh
So
nice.
there's still a ways to go. It's a much cheaper device in terms of price point,
Hmm.
which is really the goal. I think the first device, launched in a bear market. It was hard to get initial success with that thing, but I think one of the real theses there is we want crypto to go mobile. We want crypto to go mobile because there's no trend in any type of technology since the advent of the mobile phone that has not been a global success without having a mobile platform. It is
Right.
actually astonishing how far blockchain has gotten without having good mobile experiences yet. And so that is really the goal behind this. The whole Solana mobile stack is actually fully open source. So any manufacturers of Android devices can just take that software stack and implement it on their own devices. Also, if anyone wants to add support for another network, again, it's all open source. Go ahead and submit a pull request. We'll rename it to be the Web3 mobile stack. We can add support for other networks as well.
That's amazing. And going back to the fact that the initial one was expensive. I had a buddy. I don't have the first one, the Saga, but I have a friend who ordered the original Saga, and he's told me that it just ended up paying for itself in
It did.
time. He got so many airdrops, and he's just using this application, which is just basically making about $3 or $40 a month. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he pays for his like SIM and data usage of
Oh,
that month.
yeah. You're talking about Helium Mobile.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so
Yes.
we should talk about this too. So, this is probably the world's most successful decentralized physical infrastructure network. And so, decentralized physical infrastructure, very similar to, I would say, generalized decentralized infrastructure. So the original decentralized infrastructure protocols are like Filecoin and Arweave
Yeah.
and, Akash. These are, sort of the Web3 cloud providers, if you want to put it that way, where you have sort of abstract storage and abstract compute that's available in a decentralized cloud. Decentralized physical infrastructure networks are a very similar concept, except where the physical location is of the equipment matters deeply to the network, right? I don't really care where the Filecoin servers are as long as there's enough of them in enough geographic locations that I can be sure my data is secure. With DeEPIN networks, what we're talking about are networks that provide things like cell phone service and IoT wireless coverage. And so where that physical node is physically in the world matters for the quality of service that it can produce.
Right.
So Helium Mobile is actually a cell carrier built on top of the Helium decentralized wireless network. And so the Helium network has, thousands of nodes all over the country, specifically for the country on the 5G network system. They're building out overseas as well. But what this means is, I have a cell phone plan on my phone that runs on the Helium network. And
Right.
so my phone will actually connect to these towers that are just put up in people's apartments and houses. And, my monthly bill goes to those individuals in the form of credits on the Helium network. And this is what the mobile token is. Additionally, my phone is, since we're in the early days of the network, my phone is mapping coverage. So every time my phone connects to a tower, it sends data back to the Helium servers. And I've opted into this. You don't have to do this about where my phone's location is and what the signal strength is. And it helps them build out a coverage map for the entire system. And
Right.
so in that way, I get more money every month than my cell phone bill is because that mapping service is something that otherwise Helium would have to pay people $70 an hour with probably $10,000 of specialized equipment to go out and map each street corner like something like Verizon does. And so
Yeah.
it's really cool to see sort of how these systems work.
No, it's fantastic. It's mind blowing. I don't know nearly enough about it as I should, but I will definitely read a bit more about it and kind of familiarize myself with the process. There's always so many new things in crypto that you feel like no matter how much you read about things, you're kind of lagging behind.
Yeah, I'd say one of the really cool things about crypto in general is it usually strips things down to their barest economic relationships,
Mm,
and it reduces the friction to ideally as close to zero as possible for economic activity. So this is sort of where I think the whole DEEPIN thesis is an incredibly strong one, which is that right now our infrastructure and our data usage is tied indirectly to monetization services.
right.
So today, what happens when you pay money to your cell phone carrier, right? It goes to them. They spend it on all sorts of marketing-y, infrastructure-y things, but generally speaking, not much of it goes to actually providing you service. This is sort of the secret of cell phone carriers is like the amount they invest in infrastructure every year is not that high. It's usually, a single digit, if not low double digit percent of their overall revenue goes to
Yeah,
actual infrastructure. So most of the rest of that is some form of profit or some form of overhead. And if you've ever gone to a cell phone store and tried to get something changed on your plan, you know a hell of a lot of it goes to overhead for bad software systems that really should be redesigned, right? So by
100%.
starting from zero, there's a ton of optimization carriers are able to get just off of that. But let's look at something like the Hive Mapper network. So
Mm,
Hive Mapper is a dash cam network where as you drive down the road, it takes photos and it uses your phone and it uploads those photos to Hive Mapper. And what it builds is basically a decentralized Google Street View. Now, each of those photos is much lower quality than the Google Street View car, right? The Google Street View car is outfitted with probably $500,000 of sensors and cameras and all this fancy stuff. But, even if you're in New York like me, it drives down your road at most once every 2 years.
yeah,
That data is not particularly fresh. And sometimes it's the winter, sometimes it's the spring or the summer, and all you can see are trees because all the leaves are out, or it's in the winter and you can't really see what these things look like. And so Hive Mapper's whole vision is we're going to have lower quality image data, but we're going to use AI to build compilation images from hundreds of thousands of different photos of the same street in tons of different weather conditions,
right.
in tons of different lighting conditions. And suddenly you can start answering questions like, how likely am I to find parking on this street? How well is this street plowed? If I'm looking at, buying a house on this street or something like that, I'd like to know what it looks like in different times of the year and different seasons. All of these types of geospatial questions end up getting answered with high frequency data that you cannot answer with low frequency, high resolution data.
Right.
And suddenly we get to a world where the Uber driver with this dash cam is getting paid just as much from their photos and from their data analysts as they get from Uber. And suddenly, if they have a Helium Mobile hotspot as well, and then that's we get to a world pretty quickly where we are able to sort of take these components of our economic system that are currently super inefficient, right?
Yeah.
And the analogy here is UPS and FedEx. If
Mm,
you went back before UPS and FedEx existed, and you wanted to send a package from one part of the country to the other, you basically had to hire a courier, right? And this was a guy you were going to give your box to. Sorry, this is a guy you're gonna give your box to, and they're gonna go bring it somewhere else in the country. It's gonna cost huge amounts of money to do that.
yeah.
What if instead there was enough latent demand and enough routing in the system that we could build a network that could get packages anywhere in the country in about 2 days for about $10? And that's the world we live in today because you're able to start building these economies of scale. And that is really the long-term vision of DePIN. And you need a fast blockchain like Solana to be able to do that. You need fast finality, high transaction count, and really low transaction fees to be able to make any of these decentralized physical infrastructure networks possible.
Yeah, and that's just mind blowing. I wasn't aware of this application,
Yeah.
and you could totally get around the low quality with AI upscaling if you really wanted. Like AI upscaling is at a point where it's
Yeah.
pretty good at upscaling images. Like you can give it a low quality image, you would turn it into a high quality image. And to your point about having mediocre or even low quality data that's almost real time versus good quality outdated information, I'd pick the first one, any day of the week, 100%.
Yeah, and HiveMapper just released a new camera a few days ago that now has depth sensors. Well, it has two cameras, far enough apart that they
Right.
can do differential depth math on
Damn.
stuff. And so, you get to a place where, again, like one sample on that depth camera 6 inches apart, not very accurate. 100 samples, they can tell you exactly how far that house's setback is from the street. They can
Yeah.
tell you exactly how fat that tree is, right? They can tell you all these types of information about these types of things when you get enough data through the simple systems. And so
100%.
this is, I love the DePIN future because I think it's an
Yeah.
incredibly compelling vision and use case to show people that decentralized systems can actually outperform centralized systems. And that same model can be applied to finance, that same model can be applied to AI, that same model can be applied to all these different areas. It's just easiest to see through the analysis of DePIN.
Yeah. I'm actually making a note of that right now. Hive Mapper. I will definitely be checking that out. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the new things that you guys are building at the moment, specifically with Solana Foundation? Do you want to actually talk a little bit about token extensions?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So token extensions, I will say they're not built by the foundation, but we have had a
Sure.
big role in shaping how they've come together. They're built by the great folks at Solana Labs and Anza. But token extensions are a new token program for the Solana network. And the goal of this program was to give token issuers greater control over token issuance and token operation and token experiences. And those are a lot of amorphous words, so we can get
Right.
into exactly how these things actually work. But, one of the things that blockchain has always been based on this idea of optionality and freedom. And we've really heavily indexed on the permissionless tokens that can do anything mindset.
Mm.
And that piece is super awesome and super vibrant and doing great. And I think we all want to see a world where the rules and regulations governing how tokens can be minted and traded and used are relaxed over time, but we don't live in that world today.
Yeah.
Today, if you want to tokenize things like securities or equities or real estate offerings, you need to maintain things like a transfer record of who owns all of these types of things. And today, when people try and bring things like real world assets on chain, they're usually forced to go to private blockchains or private subnets or private forks or private L2s, where it's effectively one centralized company running the entire network. So they're able to issue compliant tokens on that network as well. So the
Right.
goal of token extensions is so you never have to launch a private blockchain again. Token extensions bring granular control down to the token program level. So an issuer can say, I'm going to mint a token, and only wallets that have passed KYC are going to be able to hold this token.
Right.
But that token will still exist on the Solana mainnet in a fully decentralized, permissionless environment. You can trade that regulated token with Bonk or some meme coin as well, right? This is really the power and promise of token extensions. So there's a ton of features built into this. One is
Right.
transfer hooks. Transfer hooks are basically a program called in between the transfer that can allow or deny the transfer. Now, a stablecoin issuer can use that for sanctions compliance. A degen can use that for all sorts of fun use cases as well. That says, well, you actually can't buy my meme coin unless you own one of my NFTs, right? That could be something someone could program in.
Right.
Or, they could say, actually, you can't buy this meme coin if you own this NFT project, which I don't like, right? So there's really
Yeah.
fun use cases here where you can create all sorts of different types of incentives and forces for folks. There are other things built in here, like permanent delegate authority, which allows stablecoin issuers to comply with freeze and seize authority for tokens they've issued, and a lot of other types of things too.
Sure.
That are really designed to meet the needs of businesses that want to build stuff on blockchain, but haven't been able to because of a lack of compliance and optionality.
Yeah. Just to go back for 1 second to transfer
Yeah.
hooks, because I think there's a lot in there. So those are fully programmable intermediate pieces of code that run before the transaction happens. It runs a check, whatever that check is, and then it decides, okay, am I going to continue with this transfer or not? But what are some of the cool? I'm assuming the transfer. I'm assuming transfer hooks are live, and
Yes.
what are some of the cool use cases that you've seen so far with transfer hooks?
Yeah, so you can use transfer hooks for all sorts of things. And there's also an extension that's very similar called a transfer fee, which people
Right.
are already using today. So transfer fees can do really cool things that can say, 5% of your transfer is burned,
Hmm.
right? Now, suddenly you've got an automatic burn mechanism built into every token transfer.
Right.
That's pretty cool.
That is
There's a
cool.
lot of applications for things like that. For transfer hooks, though, I think the main way people are using them today is for sanction compliance, right? Is to
Right.
basically make sure that they don't run afoul, of some sort of rules and regulations there. Or you could even say something along the lines of like, well, there's a wallet that's, we have a like a and no one's using it this way today, but there's very cool applications for proactive security. Like, for example, someone creates a wallet drainer contract and, for a fake NFT mint and people start accidentally doing it. If you're the token issuer, you could just add that to a list of like, no, you can't transfer anything to this wallet drainer address. And suddenly
Right.
you've blocked a wallet drainer, right? So there's lots of safety and security features that can be built into this as well. I will say though, I think a lot of people are probably rightly saying like, wait a minute, but blockchains are all built on permissionless. This feels like it's not in keeping with that. All these
Mm.
features are optional. They're not required for anyone to enable, and they all have to be specified before a token has been generated. So you can't
Right.
just add a transfer hook, after the fact. You can't just add in these extensions to an existing token. They all have to be spelled out. You can upgrade the program and you can do all sorts of things like that, but all of the extensions have to be initialized at token creation. So someone will never be in a situation where something is done to a token that they didn't expect.
Right. Yeah. And that just makes sense. You don't want to have that level of, hey, let's just, suddenly change the way this token functions. Um, I love the fact that they're made for compliance with KYC and AML in mind. I feel like that part of the process cannot be understated how important it is for organizations today. I also work as a product lead for an art gallery, which we have an NFT marketplace as well. So we're in the process of creating this workflow where we do VAT and AML at the point of purchase. And we've been looking at different solutions on how to do this. I wasn't aware of the token extension at the time, which is fantastic. We are on Ethereum right now, but we're considering moving to or supporting Solana as well. So we've discovered this tool called Proofy, which pretty much does just that. It takes your KYC status, stores it on chain, and then in the future you can reuse this status. But the fact that a chain as big as Solana is offering this out of the box, man, that's just fantastic.
This is one of those things where one of the big advantages, this is all in one token program.
Yeah.
And so that means that, like some of the stuff has been possible in other networks before, right? Not all of this is truly only possible on Solana, but it's always required custom work. It said, "Oh, we've assembled 2 or 3 smart contracts from 2 or 3 providers. Now we have to go out to all the wallets and get them to support this. We have to go to all of the infrastructure providers and the explorers and get them able to understand how this stuff works." By doing it on token extensions, you get all that support out of the box. And so you can do something like use a transfer fee that instead of having it be a burn mechanism,
Right.
it can be your VAT, right? And your VAT can automatically be deducted at every transfer. You can put several transfer fees on it. You can have a royalty built in for the artist in perpetuity, right? There's all sorts of these things you can do. And because they're built in at the token program level, they can't be bypassed. And that's one of the main advantages is you get out of the box support, but you also get out of the box security that these features are going to be respected because it's at the token program level, not a smart contract level.
Right. And this would basically save engineers time trying to roll out their own solutions or move to side chains like other private chains like you've mentioned.
Yeah.
There's also more there than just the transfer hooks, right? There's also one feature that I thought was super cool to see was the confidential transfers. The
Yes.
fact that you can still keep the ledger and the information but hide the amounts of what is actually being transferred. That's again another very like
Yeah.
integral feature there.
This is I'm glad you brought this up because, these get conflated with actual private transfers, and they're
Right.
not private transfers, right? If you and I had a confidential transaction, you could still see we transacted, and you can even see the token type, USDC or something like that. But the amount transferred would be hidden.
Right.
This is really cool for a few reasons. The first is it actually has to be enabled by the token issuer. So the token issuer has to say, I would like my token to be able to be transferred confidentially. Additionally, both you and I would have to opt in to confidential transfers. And so this sort of solves the dusting problem. This also can solve a lot of the legal issues around, mixers and those sorts of things. But additionally, the token issuer can appoint an auditor that has the ability to audit and decrypt these types of confidential transfers as well, if they want to do something like that. So we think these types of transfers are really important for a few use cases. One is business to business payments, where you may not want the details of, an agreement between, a business and, a creditor or something like that to be publicly known.
Right.
But it's fine for people to know they're transacting. Another big one is on chain payroll, where, I think we really, I would love to see us move to a world where a lot more people are getting paid in stable coins on chain. But, it could create some odd questions in the office if everyone knows how much everyone else is being paid. And so
Right.
this is where something like confidential transfers with confidential balances is a really, really cool technology to help sort of address some of these problems.
Oh yeah, and it just helps adoption. It brings adoption just a step closer.
Exactly.
Like it's undeniable that institutions will eventually start onboarding on chain. Some of them have already, more will follow, and I think giving them the set of tools to kind of help with that, it's definitely a move for the future, and that's an amazing thing to see. Um,
Yes.
what other features or plans do you guys have for the next, let's say, couple of years in terms of adoption, in terms of functionality,
Oh,
etc.?
man. It's pretty impossible to plan a couple of years out. What I'll say is, like, this year, one of the main things we're looking forward to is the launch of Fire Dancer on mainnet.
Okay.
This is the first time there's an independent validator client built for the Solana ecosystem. So this is a totally independent code base. It's built in C as opposed to being built in Rust. Ethereum is the only other network that has multiple validator clients in independent languages. This is a really big piece for security and stability of the network over the long term. The odds of there being a bug in two independent clients at the same time in the same place is functionally zero. So that's a really great
Right.
advantage there. You actually saw this on Ethereum last summer, where you had a bunch of finality incidents caused by a bug in one client, but the network was able to stay up because there were multiple independent clients. So I'm really excited to see that launch on the Solana network. Plus the Firedancer client, again, as I said, they're aiming for a 100x performance increase over the current client over the next few years. And so there should be some pretty massive performance increases that come with the launch of Firedancer as well.
Damn, that sounds awesome, man. That sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Well, listen, this has been an incredible conversation, and I feel like I've learned a lot during this time. Is there anything else that you'd feel like you want to announce or you'd like to add to this for people to be aware of?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd say also is solana.com/developers. If you've sort of been inspired and you want to check out how to build stuff on the network and what people have built, that's a great place to go and get started and sort of see a bunch of the work that's going on.
Nice one. Nice one. Well, thanks,
Yeah.
Austin. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to maybe checking in next year or something like that. See what the latest developments are.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Austin. Bye.
Thanks.